Welcome to Learn English Road. Today, we'll go on a beautiful and emotional journey through one of the most powerful stories in English literature, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. This is not just a love story. It is the story of a young woman's strength, independence, and search for truth in a world that tries to break her. Listen to the end for a message that will touch your heart. And don't forget to subscribe for more great stories. Let's look at some main characters before we dive into the story. Jane Eyre, a plain, orphaned girl with strong morals and deep inner strength, becomes a governess and later finds love and independence, symbol of resilience, honesty, and self-respect. Mr. Edward Rochester, wealthy, mysterious master of Thornfield Hall, gruff and secretive, but deeply emotional. Hides his mad wife, Bertha, in the attic. Loves Jane for her soul, not her status. Bertha Mason, Rochester's first wife, mentally ill and hidden in Thornfield's attic, represents madness, secrets, and the consequences of societal pressure. Helen Burns, Jane's kind friend at Lowood School, teaches Jane about faith, forgiveness, and inner peace. Dies young, but her spirit influences Jane's values. Mrs. Reed, Jane's cruel aunt who raises her at Gateshead, treats Jane unfairly and coldly out of jealousy and class bias. St. John Rivers, Jane's cousin, a serious and religious man, wants Jane to marry him for duty, not love, represents logic and control versus emotion and freedom. Once upon a time, in early 19th century England, there lived a poor, orphaned girl named Jane Eyre. She was plain-looking, small, and not very strong, but inside her lived a deep spirit, brave, honest, and proud. Jane was sent to live with her aunt, Mrs. Reed, at Gateshead Hall after her parents died. But her life there was full of pain. Her aunt and cousins treated her cruelly. She was blamed for everything and was often locked away and beaten. One day, after being unjustly punished, Jane finally stood up for herself and shouted at her aunt. It was a small moment, but it gave her strength, the first step in becoming her own person. At 10 years old, Jane was sent away to Lowood School, a strict boarding school for poor girls. The headmaster, Mr. Brocklehurst, was cold and harsh. He called her a liar in front of everyone. The girls were underfed, poorly dressed, and always cold. But even in that dark place, Jane found friendship. She met Helen Burns, a sweet, gentle girl who taught her about patience, faith, and love. Helen sadly died from illness, but her memory stayed in Jane's heart forever. Years passed. Jane grew into a young woman. She stayed at Lowood as a teacher for some time, but she wanted more. She wanted freedom, experience, and a new life. So, at 18, she left Lowood and became a governess, a private teacher for children. She got a job at Thornfield Hall, a large, mysterious house in the countryside. There, she taught a little French girl named Adele. The housekeeper, Mrs. Fairfax, was kind, but the master of the house, Mr. Edward Rochester, was a mystery. Jane didn't meet him right away. But one day, while walking on the road, she helped a man who had fallen off his horse. He was gruff, proud, and serious, and he was Mr. Rochester. As they spent time together, Jane and Rochester grew close. He was older, moody, and not handsome, but Jane saw something deeper in him. He talked to her like she was an equal, rare for a man of that time. He liked her honesty and strength. And slowly, Jane began to feel something she had never known: love. Strange things began to happen at Thornfield. In the middle of the night, Jane heard laughter in the hallway. One time, Rochester's bed was set on fire, and Jane saved him. Rochester said it was just a servant, Grace Poole, but Jane felt something was wrong. Then, one day, Rochester invited guests to Thornfield. Among them was the beautiful and wealthy Blanche Ingram, who seemed to be his future bride. Jane tried to stay calm, but inside she was heartbroken. Still, she never let her pride fall. She believed Rochester would never love someone like her. Plain, poor, and alone. But one evening everything changed. Rochester suddenly asked Jane to marry him. Not Blanche, but her. Jane could not believe it. At first, she thought it was a joke, but he held her hand and told her, "I love you, Jane. Not for your looks, not for your money, but for your soul." They planned to marry. Jane was overjoyed. Finally, someone saw her for who she truly was. But on the wedding day, a terrible truth was revealed. As the priest began the ceremony, a man stood up and said Rochester could not marry because he was already married. It was true. Years ago, Rochester had married a beautiful woman named Bertha Mason in Jamaica. But she had gone mad soon after. She was violent and dangerous, and he kept her locked in the attic of Thornfield, the source of the laughter and strange events. Rochester had tried to forget her, tried to find happiness with Jane, but the law and truth caught up to him. Jane was devastated. She still loved Rochester, but she could not stay. She could not be with a man who had lied to her, even if he loved her. With a broken heart, she left Thornfield with nothing. No money, no food, no home. She wandered the cold countryside, alone and starving. But fate was not finished with Jane Eyre. She was found by kind strangers, St. John Rivers and his sisters who took her in. She gave them a false name, not wanting them to know who she was. Slowly, she recovered and began teaching again in a village school. Later, Jane discovered that St. John and his sisters were not strangers after all. They were her cousins. And even more surprisingly, her long-lost uncle had died and left her a large fortune. Jane was now an independent woman, no longer poor or dependent on anyone. She shared the money with her cousins and finally had a family. St. John, serious and religious, asked Jane to marry him and travel with him to India as a missionary's wife. But Jane refused. She respected him, but she didn't love him. Her heart still belonged to Rochester. One night, Jane felt something strange, as if she heard Rochester's voice calling her. It was just a feeling, but it was so strong she knew she had to go back. She returned to Thornfield, but the house was in ruins. A fire had destroyed it. She soon learned that Bertha had set the fire herself and jumped to her death. Rochester had saved everyone but lost his sight and one hand in the process. Jane went to him. He was living in a quiet, simple house, blind and broken. But when Jane entered the room, he knew her voice. He cried. He thought he had lost her forever. Jane told him she had come back, not out of pity, but because she loved him. And now, nothing stood between them. They married, and their love was even stronger than before. Rochester slowly regained sight in one eye and saw their first child. For the first time in their lives, both Jane and Rochester found peace. Thank you for listening to Jane Eyre, a story about courage, love, and never giving up on your values. Jane didn't choose the easy path. She chose the right one, and in the end, she found true happiness, not through wealth or beauty, but by staying true to her heart. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to Learn English Road for more emotional stories that help you learn English and understand life better. See you in the next video!